very cheerful and hale and healthy in this COVID situation, pandemic situation. So welcome all for TED Talks edition 8. So we all know TED Talks is abbreviation of TAS e-learning for trainees, which essentially trains postgraduates to present cases and enables them to discuss with their examiners in a more lucid way. So it's a practice session and for the person who presents. And for those who watch this video, it will be like an introduction to what type of questions they ask, because in most of the national board institutes, they don't have good clinical case discussions. So, and most of the medical colleges also lack in this regard. So to help postgraduates in their preparation, this is a small endeavor from our society, the NSET Society. So I welcome you all for this case discussion on difficult airway. So once difficult airway comes, I think even a senior consultant becomes jitter, isn't it? They throw a lot of jitters, and airway disaster may ruin many people's career. I know few doctors and professionals losing their career because of their airway disaster management. So it's very important as an anesthetist to secure airway, and it has to be taught from post-graduation days onwards. So this report of National Audit Project, that is the 4th National Audit Project of RCOA, was on major complications of airway management in United Kingdom. So this report is very useful for postgraduates. If you go through this report, you have all clinical scenarios discussed threadbare for you to get a complete knowledge on airway management. And with this, I would like to welcome Dr. Venila Rajagopal. She is a senior consultant working at Apollo Women's Hospital, Chennai. She is trained in UK, and her special interest is airway. And she had done with us, I should mention at this juncture that her role played during TACON 2018 as an organizing committee, where she used to participate in all preparations of TACON, and she had taken lead in managing the workshop on difficult airway. So welcome, Dr. Venila, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Suren. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, so same here. And we have with us Dr. Vidhi Gajjar. She's assistant professor from AMC Medical Education Trust Medical College, LG Hospital, Ahmedabad. Welcome, madam.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
So I should thank you, madam, because you volunteered to prepare your PG to present this case. So thank you very much from our side.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to be a part of this group and its academic activities, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have the hero of the evening, Dr. Harsh Shah. He's a third-year resident, and he has volunteered to present this case, and he'll be subjected to a pleasant interaction with his examiners. So welcome, Dr. Harsh. So don't worry, you are in safe hands. So your airway is always secured. Okay, and I think both the examiners will keep you very safe and out of that tension of having to present in an exam. So may I ask you to share the presentation from your side, Dr. Harsh? Yeah. Are you able to share?
Not going to open.
Sometimes I keep it locked, so I checked it is okay. Are you able to?
No. Not able to open.
You're not able to share because
Yes.
Did you go to the share button? Did you hit the share?
Yes, sir. Share button.
Hmm. You'll get a dialog box inside. Are you able to?
No, sir. Not. It's not going to open.
Okay, otherwise no problem. I will share from my side.
Okay, sir.
1 minute. Are you able to see from my side? Are you able to see from my side? Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, all of you. My name is Dr. Art. I'm going to present the case of the burn contractor release. Presenting a case of 40-year female factory worker residing at Maninagar, Ahmedabad, presenting with the complaint of post-burn scar over the face and the neck, which causing the difficulty in the neck movement, posture for the post-burn contracture release and the skin grafting. History of presenting illness. History of explosive burns at the workplace. 1 year back, predominantly over the face and neck, which is involving the 32.5% of the total body surface area. There is no any history of the hoarseness of the voice, stridor, snoring, and breathing difficulty at present. No any history of the position-related breathing difficulty at present. There is also no any history of the dysphagia or aspiration. So past history of patient has history of accidental burn at the workplace. 1 year back involved the 32.5% total body surface area. History of the post-burn dressing under the anesthesia and operated for the skin grafting 11 months back under the general anesthesia. The all over the hospital stay of the patient is 2 to 3 months and the procedure was uneventful. There is no any history of the ICU admission or the tracheostomy, history of the blood transfusion 11 months back, and there is not a known case of the diabetic mellitus, hypertension, tuberculosis, bronchial asthma, epilepsy, transient ischemic attack, and there is also no any history of the drug allergy. The family history is also not significant. The obstetric history is 2 live child. The personal history, the patient taking the mixed diet, normal bowel and bladder habits, appetite is normal, no any history of the subcutaneous substance abuse. The menstrual history is normal, is a menarche at the age of 14 years, regular cycle, and the no any history of the dysmenorrhea or menorrhagia. The marital history of patient was married since 14 years and no any consanguineous marriages. On general examination, patient is conscious, cooperative, and well oriented to time, place, and person. Moderately built and average nourished. Weight is 55 kg and height is 152 centimeter, and BMI is 23 kilogram per meter square. She looks paler and no any cyanosis, clubbing, icterus, or lymphadenopathy. The pulse is 78 per minute in the right radial artery in the sitting position with regular adequate force, volume, tension equal on both the sides. No radioradial, radiofemoral delay. All peripheral pulse are palpable. Her blood pressure is 124 by 80 mm of Hg in the right arm sitting position. Respiratory rate is 12 to 14 per minute regular. No any accessory muscles of respiration or intercostal muscle of respiration 6. Breath holding time is 45 seconds. On general examination, the general examination of the burns area, the burns are present over the face involving the cheeks and the contracture present over the chin and the neck. Scar also present on the upper part of the both the arm, front and the back of the chest, but no restricted mobility on both the arm. Veins are visible on the dorsum of the hand, which was unburned area. The A1 airway examination, her mouth opening is 1.5 finger. Modified Malampatti grade is 4. There is no any loose teeth. Neck extension is less than 85 degree and thyromental distance is 4 centimeter. Steromental distance is 8 centimeter. Upper lip bite is grade 3, that is lower incisor cannot bite upper lip. Temporomandibular joint is restrict mobility and unable to protrude the mandible. Both nostrils are patterned. So the summary is 40-year female with not a known comorbidity as a post-burn contracture over the neck and face, has difficult airway on examination, was posted for post-burn contracture release and skin grafting.
Okay. Can you hear me there, Dr. Harsh?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. So it's a very interesting case. So looking back, starting with your history. So it was a burn injury. What was the nature of the burn and how does it matter to your history?
The nature of burn is very important. They're like burns are the inhalation burns, there is explosive burns, scald burns, flame burns, electric burns, or it is the electric burn. So the inhalation burn, if the patient has inhalation burn, there is a chances of airway involvement and so it is very important to know about the types of the burn which is involved in the patient.
So this lady had what type of burn? Can you repeat?
This lady is an explosive one on the factory at the factory.
And at the first admission, did she have any airway problems?
No, she didn't have any airway problem at that time on admission.
Okay. So why is it relevant to ask about ICU admission or the length of stay for this lady in the previous admission?
Because if there is a patient, if the patient came to like the patient is explosive burn, so there is a chances of inhalation burn injury in if patient has inhalation burn injury. So in inhalation burn injury, our airway is compromised. So during the inhalation, starting from the nasal cavity, from the oral cavity, first the airway, our airway, in the airway, the oral cavity, there is a blackening and the soot in the trachea, or there is a edema. So due to the edema, patient not able to take respiration properly. So there is a chances of airway obstruction, and due to airway obstruction, there is a breathing difficulty in this patient. So if the patient have any breathing difficulty at that time, so we have to intubate the patient and put on the ventilator. So it is important to know the past history of any intubation or ICU admission in this patient.
Right. So starting from the nasal cavity, nasopharynx, oropharynx, all the way down to larynx and then trachea, you will have injury at every point is possible, right? So that's a 20 to 30% have, and we need to know what level of injury happened a year ago and what are the consequences now. So anything else in ICU admission that might be important for you? If at all she had any ICU admission. If this lady was in ICU.
There is a burn contracture over the face. So if the airway is difficult, so we know the patient is on the oral intubated or tracheostomy was done at that time.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, because that will make a huge difference to what you will anticipate this year, correct? Would you agree? Yes. And what about the percentage of burn that this lady had suffered? How would you classify her and how is that important again from the anesthetic perspective?
The percentage of burn we can classify on the base of the rule of the 9, Well's rule of the 9. In this, we can count the whole upper head and neck count as a 9%. The upper part of the chest is 9%. The hand, both the hand, each hand is counted as a 9%, and the lower abdomen, front and back is a 9%. Perineum area is a 1%, and the leg is each leg is a 18%. So total, we can count on the basis of this 9%, each counted by based on this. According to if there is a deep, we can know the patient superficial burns, deep burns, or partial thickness or deep burns. So
yes.
We can know about the admission of the patient, and we can know how to treat the patient at the time of patient presentation.
So you have told me this patient has got 32.5% burns, and so what degree, and is that simple burn or complex burn? As in, how would you put that as?
It is a
how would you call that
degree, so it is a count as a major burn. So it comes into the deep major burn and the deep burns.
Yes, and she had a good recovery in the acute admission time. So that is what you have told us from the history. So, okay. So inhalational burns, And what else would you expect if she had had a long-term injury from inhalational burn 1 year later? Is there anything else from the history that you would suspect, that you would have asked? You told us about breathing in relation to position. Is there anything else that you would like to give me detail about that?
If the patient is inhalation burn, there is a at the time of inhalation, there is a we can rule out the one by one all the oral airway one by one. So in this case, first off from the oral cavity, we can see the from the oral cavity there is a redness or any injury, redness or blackening of the oral cavity in the inhalation burn. After that, there is an injury to the nasociliary function of the airway.
No,
So
I
there is
think we have discussed that. Coming to the position, how would that relate to your question on position? Say, for example, sitting, lying down on either side. How does that, can it be affected? Any particular condition?
If there is any tracheal tug or there is any soot particle in the lung, so it can affect the patient position and atelectasis can be developed.
So any long-term fibrosis, obstructive pathway leading on to fibrosis of one particular lung pulled over to the other side, tracheal tug, or if there was any long-term corrosive injury into esophagus causing any fistula, any other symptoms that you would have asked if they had long-term complications? And I think you mentioned that in the history. No history of aspiration. And what about the burns in, did she have any burns in her back?
Yes, ma'am. She has a burns over the back and front.
But she is able to lie flat. Is that important to us from our perspective?
Yes, ma'am. Due to the we have the induction of anesthesia or the before the induction, if the patient is not able to lie down properly, it is difficult to mask ventilate the patient or anesthesia induction is very difficult in this patient.
Correct. So, so from just the burn history, if you can just summarize in one sentence, what is the important thing that you would tell me now? So this is, how would you summarize in one line? Just the airway history and burns history.
In the burn history, there is a neck contracture of the patient and with the difficult airway.
Okay, so it's a lady with a history of burn 1 year ago, explosion with no airway symptoms right now, and no breathing affected by position, no aspiration, and no obstructive breathing. Right? So is noisy breathing important?
Yes, ma'am. If the patient has stenosis or there is a tracheal stridor can be developed in this patient. So if there is a tracheal stenosis or difficulty in breathing at that time.
Or even if there was any space in the oropharyngeal space narrowing, you might have noisy breathing, correct? Like your obese patients. So luckily this patient is not obese, so we don't have any added factors. So next point, you talked about comorbidities. So this lady does not have comorbidities. Say for example, she had any other comorbidity like asthma or obesity or respiratory system related illness. How would that affect your anesthesia management, like asthma or allergy?
If this patient have allergic history, there is a high risk patient because there is already burn airway burns. Due to the burns, there is a airway injury. If suspect, we can suspect the airway injury. There is a high risk patient, and we have to take full precaution in this patient. First, we can give the bronchodilator or to this patient, and there is a chances of bronchospasm during the induction of anesthesia or at the time of procedure.
So that would help you to prepare this patient better, correct? Pre-operative. Yeah. So the duration of burn was 1 year ago. Is that significant from the anesthetic perspective?
Yes, ma'am. Duration is important for the induction of anesthesia, and the relaxation we can use in the operation. For intubation, we can, due to the
Hello, Dr. Harsh. Sorry, can you unmute yourself, please?
Hello.
Ah.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Thanks.
Due to the burn, there is a we cannot use the depolarizing muscle relaxant at that time, and the activity of the non-depolarizing muscle relaxant is also increased. So we can use the more amount of the depolarizing muscle relaxant because
Why is it that we
during the
can't
first 24
use?
hours we can use the depolarizing muscle relaxant. After 24 because there is a increase the extrajunctional acetylcholine receptor at the neuromuscular junction, which increase due to the increased depolarization, and there is a increase the chances of potassium secretion, and there is a hyperkalemia may be developed in this patient if we can use the succinylcholine like depolarizing muscle relaxant.
Yes. So with non-depolarizing relaxants, you said that so they're going to be sensitive to succinylcholine, and you have a good reason to try and avoid them if possible. And for non-depolarizing agents, what did you say? Sorry, I think the audio was not clear for me. They are resistant.
So there.
So they are resistant. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So they are resistant to non-depolarizing agent, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And why is that?
So we have to use the increased dose of the non-depolarizing muscle relaxant. So due to the upregulation of the acetylcholine receptor, and that due to the non-depolarizing muscle relaxant, we get increased amount of dose, and there is an increase after the 48 hours during the burns. First 48 hours there is a hypovolemic phase, and after 48 hours to the hypermetabolic and hypervolemic state. So at that time, there is an increase the blood flow and the cardiac output. So there is an increase the renal and the liver blood flow. So increase the metabolism of the drug is more drug metabolism. So we have to use higher dose of the drug.
Yes, you're right. You've told me 2 points. One more, anything else that might affect a lot of our anesthetic drugs in a patient who has been ill and affected with burns or critical illness over a period of time?
There is a release of any inflammatory marker, and which can also lead to the more chances. We can also lead to the effect of drug delay.
And also the protein binding. So
Yes.
these patients can be, it also, so her level of nutrition and protein status is something important in this one. Okay. So this is, so Dr. Vidhi, would you like to ask anything at this point in relation to history?
Yes, ma'am. What would be the signs of inhalational injury, and for when will you evaluate the patient for inhalational injury? At what junction in the acute phase will you evaluate the patient for an inhalational injury?
If the patient came to the trauma, first after the patient receive, we can just rule out that there is a what type of the burns present is. If the patient has inhalation burn, we have to see the first from the starting from the front of the face. There is a blackening or any blackening to the nasal cavity or from the nose or oral cavity. There is a redness to the nasal mucosa and oral mucosa. After that, there is a shoot particles are present into the nasal cavity, and there is a coughing of the patient due to the shoot particles and the into the oral cavity, and the patient is complain of coughing, and there is a collection of expectoration with cough present came with.
Also, we need to rule out singed facial and nasal hairs that might which might be suggestive of an inhalational injury, and also the amount of time that was spent at the site of burns. That also determines the amount of inhalational injury that can be suspected. And this is the immediate assessment that we do for inhalational injury. If none of the signs of difficulty in respiration or inhalational injury are there, do we need to recheck the patient for an inhalational injury after some time, or evaluation once is enough?
No, if we can assess the first, then we have to observe the patient for the 24 to 48 hours, and we have to assess the oral cavity. So in this patient, there is a chances of oral edema and the pharyngeal edema. So after the first 24 hours, we initiate the fluid resuscitate the patient. There is chances of edema. So there is a chances of airway obstruction and tracheal obstruction. So there is a chances of breathing difficulty and in the early phase of the patient.
Okay. Anything else, Dr. Vedi? Should we go to?
Yes, we can proceed.
We can proceed. Yes. So now coming to general examination. So she's averagely nourished. Anything in particular with relation to nourishment that you would like to add at this point, considering we mentioned about burns, muscular injury, and everything else? Just one point.
There is in this patient or in general now?
In this patient, yes.
No, there is no any injury of the deep muscle injury, or there is a bone injury or in this patient.
There was no deep injury. So she was not protein depleted and she has recovered well. From your assessment, you find that she is recovered well. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, grand. So coming to this, coming to your airway examination, why do we conduct airway examination in general?
Because due to the airway is important from our anesthesia side, we have to intubate the patient, or there any difficulty during the mask ventilation. There is airway is very important from us. In this patient, there is due to the burns injury, there is a chances of development of contracture. So there is a difficult mask ventilation or difficult intubation in this patient.
Yes. So you're conducting your examination in specific to the airway, one, to identify if there's a problem, correct? You're going to identify if there is a problem and where is the problem. So is there a problem? And if so, where is it? And how can you modify your plan accordingly? So that is why we are doing examination. So why do we do our examination? So what are these areas of difficulty that you're looking for in this particular lady? So you have already said that airways might be narrow. So you're looking for narrow spaces and during intubation, as well as
during the mask ventilation.
Yes, so mask ventilation, intubation. So what are the 4 stages of airway process that you should be looking for difficulty in? So first is bag mask ventilation, next is laryngoscopy, next would be the actual intubation itself, and then if there is a problem with ventilation. So this lady has got front of the area scars. So anything that you might be wondering, there might be difficulty in ventilation, you think?
Yes, there is no proper head extension to this lady, so there is a chances of difficulty in mask ventilation.
Mm-hmm. And you might have problem in ventilation if at all, because the chest might be tight. So we're coming down to the end.
Decreased compliance of the chest wall because of the contracture tissue can be anticipated.
Can be anticipated. She might need a different type of volumes, and we have to be careful at extubation as well. So we're going to think about intubation, intraop, and post-op extubation, how we are going to deal with it. All of this will come in your airway assessment. So yes, talking about anything else you would like to ask, Dr. Vidhi?
What would be the difference in the airway assessment when we would be addressing this patient for an acute management and for this case that she presented? What would be the difference in the airway assessment at both the times? Would you expect a difficulty in ventilation at the acute stage that we are anticipating now?
No, during the acute phase, there is no any difficulty because there is no contracture is not developed at that time.
But then what would be the challenges at that time?
There at that time the airway edema, so we can't due to the we can if we intubate the patient, there is chances of bleeding or on the oral cavity, and we cannot see the proper view of the laryngoscope.
But as ma'am said, if we go from bag and mask, the first challenge at that time would be placing your mask because she had facial burns. So that particular point would be challenging for us to place the Vaseline gauze pieces so that we can hold the mask, which would itself be very painful for the patient. So that is the difference, that bag and mask was a challenge initially, and bag and mask still is a challenge. Whereas for intubation, initially we did not had any problems, but now we anticipate a difficult intubation because of the developed contracture.
Okay. Okay, so can you, talking about the airway assessment of this lady, so you have concluded was that this is a lady with post-Bowen's contracture with difficult airway. So can you quantify that with each of the assessment that you have given with any specific scoring system? Or, I mean, it is a multitude of factors. So how would you quantify each of these assessment finding and why this is going to give you a difficulty in the airway? Am I clear?
Starting from, yes, ma'am. Starting from the oral, first of the mouth opening of the patient, it is a 1.5 finger. So it is a normal mouth opening. We can assess by the opening the patient, ask the patient to fully open the mouth. There is a minimum 3 finger can go into the between the 2 incisors. So it is the adequate mouth opening. Less than 3 centimeter is due to the difficult intubation. So after that, we can assess from the oral. We can see the modified Mallampati grade. Ask the patient to protrude the tongue and see the oral cavity. In the modified Mallampati grade, there is a grade 4 grade. In the first grade, we can see the uvula, soap palate, hard palate, and the postal pillar. In the second grade, we can see the soap palate, hard palate, and uvula. And the third grade, the base of the uvula is seen, and soap palate and hard palate seen. In the fourth grade, there is only hard palate is seen. Grade 3 and grade 4 are difficult, considered as a difficult.
Okay.
So after that, we can also assess the temporomandibular joint movement and joint movement. So as the put the first finger, index finger, in front of the tragus and thumb behind the ear below the mastoid, and ask the patient to open the mouth. If the patient opens the mouth, the index finger goes behind, and the mandible is pushed forward. So that means the mouth movement of the mandible is adequate, and it is easy for the at that time of intubation. And we can also assess the mandibular length. The length of the mandible is 9 centimeter. If it is less than, there is a chances of difficult intubation at that time.
So this lady, you have told us that the thyromental distance and sternomental distance are reduced, and the temporomandibular joint is reduced. So this is because of the contractures around the cheek, face, and in the neck, right? So this is obviously the next point that we are coming down to is the neck. So why is the neck movement important, and what are the axes related to this clinically?
Normal flexion, there is a 25 to 30 degree neck flexion is a normal, and more than 85 degree extension is normal. During the extension, ask the patient to straight look and see the above the ceiling without raising your eyebrows. So we can assess the what degree of the patient extend the head. If it extend fully, it is extend the one third of it. It is extend 2/3.
But Harsh, I think ma'am wants to know, why do we need to know the extension, and why do we need that extension of the patient's head? Why is it necessary to have an adequate neck extension? What are the axes that we need to align during an intubation, and which movement of the neck is associated with which axis?
During the due to the extension, there is a our axis oropharynx, all the axes from the oral cavity and the pharynx make the align, and we can see the proper view of the larynx at that time.
Yes. So if you have an appropriate flexion and extension giving you a sniffing air position with the head support, like a blanket or a pillow sheet, or a sheet that you would give for your patient, appropriate head, you would hope that on mouth opening and with direct laryngoscopy, you will get a good view of larynx. But here it is compromised, and henceforth your direct laryngoscopy is impossible. or rather difficult or impossible. Okay, so putting together these multitude factors, is there any scoring system that you can quote me about or would help us? Because no single point is going to give us an answer. So they have given us multiple scoring systems. Anything that comes to your mind? Like, for example, the Lemon score, Wilson score. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so these scoring systems come with a combination of factors like, for example, the Lemon score would be about, obesity, neck extension, M for Mallampati. Have you heard about it before?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So these are some things that we would like to revise on. Yes, it's something important when it comes to a difficult airway, because putting together would help you chart how difficult this patient is going to be. Okay. So what about the body weight and habitus? How is this related to your patient? Is she obese, normal juncture, and are you happy with her general physical habitus? The time of, why is that relevant? If she was obese, what additional factor would you think about?
If she was obese, the patient is due to the obesity, there is it is a difficult for the difficult in the lying down position. So we have during the position we have to put the RAM position. It is the rapid airway management position. It is also called as the L bed. That means the head elevated position. Put the towel or the ring below the head and make the axis to the patient, and so that we can make the airway to the same alignment, and we can
Pathway is good. Okay. So, and also physiological status, her decreased FRC, she may have decreased capacity to maintain oxygenation, and you might want to prepare her better. Right. Okay. So if anything else? So airway assessment, is there any other bed test that you would do with relation to airway and breathing, considering this lady has had an inhalational burn injury a year ago? Tell me 2 things you will definitely do for this lady bedside before we go to investigations.
we are going for the pulmonary function test for this patient, bedside PFT.
And why is that important?
Because due to the inhalation injury, if the patient is inhalation injury, there is a decrease in the functional residual capacity of this patient, decrease in lung capacity, and there is a increase the arterial oxygen gradient to this patient. So due to the decrease in FRC, if the we cannot pre-oxygenate properly, there is a chances of early place of the oxygen during the intubation. If there is a difficult intubation, so during at that time, if we can take the more times to intubate it and that patient, and the patient FRC is low, so proper oxygen is not maintained at
So
that
breath
time,
holding
and
for your
SpO2 is
patient,
decreased.
correct. So breath holding for your patient is 45 seconds, and you feel that it is adequate enough for us within the normal range.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So anything else? Anything else you can do, or you might do? So you can do peak flow metry. You can ask her to blow through the balls and check what was sort of capacity is there. It's yet and again going to give you a test. Anything else that we do in head and neck injury patients, maxillofacial patients, that you can actually take it from the OT and see in the PAC clinic? Any other instrument to assess the pathway, airway pathway? Anything that you can do that the ENT surgeons also use? You use them for difficult airway cases in
laryngoscope examination.
What laryngoscopy?
Examination.
So you can use a nasal endoscopy. Am I right?
So yes, ma'am.
So how is that useful as a bedside test or your PAC clinic test?
Based on the nasal endoscopy, if the patient is if we plan for the nasal intubation, it is very useful to know about the patency of the nasal cavity. On the nasal endoscopy, we can see the nasal cavity, and also there is any injury to the nasal cavity or the oropharynx or laryngopharynx, so we can assess at that time before the surgery.
You will check for the nasal patency, assess which one is better. If there is any deviation, then going down if there is any compromise in the oropharyngeal space, and then make sure there is no stenosis all the way down. Okay, so this will help, and you will have to train yourself on a regular basis so we don't cause any harm in the preoperative period. So that is one thing. Anything you would like to ask, Dr. Vidhi?
Do we need to add an indirect laryngoscopy before going for in the PAC? Will that help us anyway? Just like ma'am said, a nasal endoscopy can help us rule out if there is any residual stenosis due to an inhalational injury in the nasal cavity, or if there's a DNS. So similarly, if there is any epiglottic injury or any injury of the laryngopharynx, and we can also advise an indirect laryngoscopy to rule out any residual injuries to that part of the airway also.
Yes. Yes. So what investigations would you like to be done on this patient?
On this patient, as the routine all investigation, there is a CBC or the blood urea examination, creatinine, electrolyte examination. The specific investigation in this patient is the carboxyhemoglobin assessment. In this patient, if the patient is inhalation injury due to the chances of carbon monoxide or cyanide poisoning, we can first assess whether there is a carboxyhemoglobin present in this patient or not.
Will you expect to see, okay, first you said CBC, she's had a history of blood transfusion. So at the moment,
Yes.
and you said still paler. So why is this important for us now? CBC?
Because there is during the CBC, there is gives about the hemoglobin, platelet, and the hematocrit and all these things. So the patient is due to the burn, there is a destruction of the RBC, and there if the patient is a blood loss during the operation or the healing blood loss, there is a decrease in the hemoglobin level in this patient, and
so it's a large surface area.
due to the hemo concentration.
Yes, go on, go on.
So the large surface area, so there is a large due to skin grafting, and at that time there is a chances of blood loss. So we can assess the patient before the operation and take the preserve BT, or we can plan our OT accordingly to this.
So you know why you're doing your CBC. Yes. Next is urea creatinine. Is that relevant for this lady?
If the patient has any kidney injury or there is a acute kidney injury, so alter the renal function.
Yes. So during acute burns, if at all she's having any acute kidney injury, is it persistent? If not, has it recovered? Yeah, you can compare with old results. And now also because we need to make sure that she has a good renal function to go ahead with the general anesthesia. Is that okay? Now, specific,
Okay.
you said about carboxyhemoglobin and cyanide. Would you expect to see any change right now, 1 year later? Yes, Dr.
No,
Vidhi wants to add something.
Do we need a carboxyhemoglobin for the present surgery that she is posted?
No.
So that is not.
So you yeah, she's saying something.
So that is an initial investigation. At this stage, we don't need any carboxyhemoglobin levels. That was what I.
Okay, and she was saturating well, and you said chest entry was good, so I wouldn't need it. So, but when you send renal functions along with urea creatinine, anything else that would be important, renal functions?
Electrolyte is also important.
Is that relevant to you?
Yes. If there is a cardiac arrhythmia or chances of cardiac arrhythmia, so we can assess the patient before the procedure, see the electrolyte level of this patient.
So it's good to know the electrolyte levels, considering it's a large surface area surgery. She may need blood. You may need to use, muscle relaxants, which might alter, and you're using a lot of lignocaine and local anesthesia. So you might want to know what the basic electrolyte status is. Yes. So next, blood investigation. Anything else? Yes, please proceed, Dr. Harsh.
Uh, we can also assess on the blood lactic acid level or albumin level in the blood,
So
serum
you're going to do liver
albumin level,
function tests.
protein assessment.
Yes, liver function tests, enzymes, proteins. Okay.
Yes.
Any other
In the
investigation?
burn patient, there is also decrease in albumin level. Decrease in the albumin level. So we have to assess the patient properly for the protein assess before surgery.
Okay. Any other investigation and the relevance to this lady?
There is a chest X-ray examination or
So chest X-ray. Why is that important? Specifically important for your patient and to relation to airway.
If there is a due to the fibrosis or any after the burn the injury to the lungs or due to the fibrosis, there is a tracheal deviation or any possible abnormality, we have to assess before.
So you have to look through the lumen, patency of the lumen, any narrowing, stricture, any particular deviation. And so you start from the tubes, the bronchi, and then you look at the lung fields and make sure there is any problems, any hyperinflation, emphysema, anything that things have changed, could have changed over the years since you last gave her general anesthesia. So you need to assess her. Anything else? Okay, so you're happy with the investigations right now? So your lady has got a, let me say, baseline hemoglobin of 9.2 and platelets are normal limits. Electrolytes are okay. LFTs are normal with slightly low albumin levels. One thing that you might want to ask for a large surface area plastic surgical procedure, I'm sure you will ask. Blood grouping, cross-matching?
Cross-match.
Yeah, okay. So is that something you would ask? Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you have come down to all your investigations. You've done your perfect examination. So now you're going to tell me how you're going to manage this patient's airway. Is there anything you would like to add now, Dr. Vidhi?
No, ma'am.
We'll ask him. Okay. Please proceed. You tell us how you would like to manage this patient's airway. Anesthesia, starting with airway.
Based on the examination, general examination and airway examination, I can reach as the conclusion that there is a difficult intubation in this patient. So I have to plan for the fiber optic intubate in this patient.
Okay. Tell me how you're going to do.
For fiber optic intubation, first I will explain the proper procedure to the patient and ask the patient to cooperate with the procedure, and so the patient is not become the anxious during the time of procedure.
Okay.
So after that, during the pre-op area, I give the glycopyrrolate injection 0.2 milligram to the patient, which decreases the secretion of the oral cavity, and also start the dexmedetomidine, which is the alpha-2 receptor blocker to the patient, which can sedate the patient.
Can I stop you there? Sorry to disturb your train of thought. So your first step is consent. You've got your consent. You've informed the patient. You told me. 2 is preparation of the patient. So when you prepare the patient, anything else you would like to add before starting dexmedetomidine? Did you give any nebulizers?
Nebulizer, okay. Lignocaine nebulizer, 2% lignocaine in the nebulizer, which can.
Sorry, what is your plan? What is your plan? You're going to do fiber optic intubation, awake, asleep, under sedation. What is your plan? And then you decide and tell us.
Okay, I will go for awake fiber optic intubation. For that, I will first start the nebulizer of the lignocaine 2% to the patient in the pre-op area. So the 10 to 15 minutes of the nebulization. After that, I will put the in the nasal cavity, put the wick of the lignocaine plus adrenaline to the nasal cavity, and also put the xylometazoline nasal drop. So which can lead to the pattern the nasal
What is the
cavity and
dose
the
of xylometazoline you're using here, doctor?
1% xylometazoline
0.1%. That is
0.1
the drops that's available. And lignocaine. So this lady
2%.
weighs how much?
Sorry, ma'am.
What is the weight of this lady and what dose, maximum dose can you use on her?
Okay, based on the 5 milligram per kg on this patient, so the patient weight is 55 kg. So based on the 250 milligram give the maximum 250 to 60 milligram to the patient.
Okay. Okay, so that means what percentage of lignocaine and how much ml are you going to draw up and keep? So isn't it safer that we draw up and keep and we know that this is the maximum limit we are going to use on this lady?
We have to first count the maximum toxic dose to the patient, and according to that we can give we have to divide the patient according to 2% lignocaine or 4% lignocaine according to the
Which is
toxic
more
dose
effective,
of the patient.
4% or 2%? What would you prefer to use on this lady?
4%.
Considering this is the only option you have, any other option you have to get the airway secured in this lady? So you want it to work best, right? So what dose will you use? I mean, what percentage? 4%?
After, yes, ma'am, 4%. So the after that there is a due to the give the inhalation anesthesia and the nasal leak. So there is no sense means the patient has no pain at the time of insertion of during the fiber optic intubation.
Okay, so I'll make sure the patient is comfortably positioned. At what position is the patient in your table, anesthesia table, OT table?
On the OT table, there I can use the supine position to the patient and put the pillow below the head, and then prefer the nasal route to the patient due to the for induction.
Prepare for the nasal intubation. You make sure your equipment is ready. You check your equipment, make sure the tubes, everything that you need for awake fiber optic nasal intubation is ready. Connect the patient to the monitor.
Yes, first in the operating room, we have to connect the monitor to the patient. So in the burns patient, there is a main problem is how to attach the monitor during ECG lead. There is a chest burns, and so ECG lead we can use the pin stapler or the needle to the patient and attach the crocodile to the patient and connect the ECG. Then SpO2 and then BP cup. So it is the difficult in this patient particular. There is no burns area to the end. So we can attach the SpO2 to the finger and also BP cup. There is a towards the leg is free from burn, so we can attach the BP cup into the leg. If there is a burns area present all over that area, we have to go for intra-arterial blood pressure monitoring.
Yes. So because the upper surface of the body is used, you may put an intra-arterial line in the lower part of the body, femoral or dorsalis pedis. Okay, so you've connected your monitors and you're going to prepare this patient's airway for intubation. So you decide that you're going to start, IV line is placed. Is that placed?
Yes, first,
yes. You connected your IV line. You got two, one for the drip and one for the sedation. Yes. So they don't get bulging anywhere, correct? Okay, so then now you're going to prepare the patient's airway. First point you said is nebulization. Second point, what is your plan?
After nebulization, we can inject the translaryngeal to the translaryngeal local anesthesia.
Laryngeal, it's transtracheal.
Tracheal.
Okay, so if you want to do transtracheal in this lady with post-Burns fracture, would you anticipate any problems?
Yeah, in this lady,
Looks
we are
quite nasty on the
yeah.
picture.
So it is difficult, so we cannot use in this lady.
What can be a problem here?
There is
It can be quite.
so there is a due to the secretion or the present, there is a chances of infection or that area particular.
So one, identification of landmark is difficult. You may try and use your ultrasound, but even in the expert eyes, I think it can be a bit difficult and tricky in this lady, but you can try. Two, it can bleed, right? If you touch this area, it can bleed and it can be an issue. So that is one. Two, anything else other than transtracheal? If the neck was okay, you would do a transtracheal injection. That's your plan, correct? If not, we will not do that. Any other plan? So you've given nebulization.
Or 10% lignocaine spray to the local area, to the oral cavity.
Okay, and you ask them to gargle and spit out. So you added this to your maximum dose. So you have to keep adding this to your maximum dose of lignocaine so that we don't have what is one problem that we should not end up in. Local anesthetic systemic toxicity. Okay, so you have to bear that in mind. So you have to keep watching the monitor. What are the things that you will ask the patient continuously? You need to have a verbal response. Anything that you would ask for local anesthetic toxicity, particularly if you're doing injections? Any circumoral?
Numbness, any jitteriness in the behavior, any
jitteriness, arrhythmias on the screen, any difference? Yes. Okay, or CNS symptoms like loss of consciousness will be the last, or fitting. Okay, so that is something to think. So before you start, yes, so this next plan, yeah, go on. So you tell nebulization, spray as you go, gargling, and you're going to add sedation. Am I right?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
And what is your plan for sedation? And before you give sedation, will you start any nasal oxygen for this patient?
Yes, ma'am. A pre-oxygenated patient for the 100% oxygen.
So you decided to use the right or left nostril?
Yes, both the I decided to use the right nostril.
Okay. So I can put my oxygen in the left, tape it up. Continuous oxygen can keep going. High flow nasal oxygen can keep going to keep your apneic period good. Is that correct?
Okay.
So you have started oxygen and you're going to start sedation. And what is your sedation? You said you're going to give glycopyrrolate to reduce secretions. Next.
That I can use for the dexmedetomidine to this patient, which can calm the patient and decrease the anxiety of this patient and sedate the patient.
What is dexmedetomidine?
It is the alpha-2 receptor blocker. The one benefit is that it cannot do the respiratory depression, so we can use safely to this patient during the awake fiber optic intubation.
Okay, so dexmedetomidine, what drug are we going to use? I mean, what doses are you going to use, and what are the things that you'll be aware of so that you don't have any complication with your sedation?
I can use the 50 microgram in the 100 ml pint over the 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. So you're giving 1 mic per kilo. For her weight, you're giving 50. 1 mic per kilo, and then you're going to over 10-15 minutes, and you watch for her. So she's going to slowly settle down. Her breathing is going to be normal, and most importantly, she needs to be able to communicate. A verbal response should be there. Okay, so that's called, you judge that by your sedation score. Any sedation score, right? What sedation score are we commonly using? Ramsay's sedation score, correct? So verbal response should be maintained to call it a conscious sedation. So what we use for awake fiber optic, when you say awake, means it should be a conscious sedation. So you can maintain a verbal response with this lady at all points of time. So we don't compromise the airway. She should be able to understand what's happening. Yeah. So you've started a bolus and you're going to maintain the dose. How is your infusion pump prepared?
Infusion pump in the prepare as a 0.1 to 5 microgram, 0.5 microgram per kg per hour as an infusion.
So normally you put 100 mics in 50 ml and then you start it and you run the infusion. Okay. So you slowly, and what are you going to check on the screen for any? What do you immediately see when you see a
For
start dexmedetomidine?
there is any heart rate monitoring and the blood pressure to this patient. There is a tachycardia or particular to this patient.
Yeah. So when you start dexmedetomidine, she will develop slowing down of the heart. Yes. Haven't you, if you notice that? Yes. When you give a dexmedetomidine bolus, the immediate response is for the everything to slow down. The BP will come down, but you should not overshoot your targets. You should still maintain a normal heart rate and blood pressure adequate enough for that lady, but and still conversing. Yes. So something between 60 to 70, and that's why you gave glycopyrrolate also. That helps. Yeah. So you've prepared, you've started the sedation, and when will you know that your lady is ready? We don't want to waste too much time. So your lady is ready, you know that? You proceed with awake intubation.
Yes, ma'am. After that, I can. After the she prepare for first of before the procedure, we all the check the fiber optic bronchoscope and all this preform check all these instrument, and so on the nasal tube is also reloaded to the port of the fiber optic scope. After that, we insert the scope bronchoscope from the nasal cavity, and then visualize to the screen, and doing the only the flexion and anterior and the posterior flexion movement and side to side movement from the hand, and go from forward to the into the larynx, and after reaching to the carina, insert the tube to the trachea, and then recheck again, and then remove the fibroscope and check, attach the tube to the oxygen ventilator, and check the proper positioning of the tube to the patient, or check the patency of this.
Okay. So ideally 2 anesthetists, one for helping you and your technician, one to guide the IV. So what size tube did you choose, please? And did you
number 7 cuff endotracheal tube.
7 or 6.5 nasal tube, because it's a lady and you have to, if she'd had injury, it might be even more narrow. So you should make sure that 6.5, because we don't, and as you pass through the nose then and through the trachea, and you have to have the anti-clockwise movement to go through the cords, so we don't cause any injury in the pathway. And once you're there, you hand over your camera to your technician, still visualizing the screen, and then slowly take your scope out, connect the cuff end, and then back, make sure chest air entry, misting, ET CO2, and then you're happy. Okay. So anybody else you would have asked to come in and stay here for such a difficult airway, considering this was the only option in these sort of grade 4 difficult airways?
There is a 2 senior anesthetic consultant are present.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't start this case on my own at any point. As Suren rightly mentioned at the beginning, one is enough for the carrier. So adequate help is always necessary. Who knows what you're speaking, and you have to follow the same communication rules between the anesthetist and the technician. Yes. And one more thing in here is this sort of setup where you have a complex airway where even tracheostomy can be difficult. You would have got your cricothyrotomy kit and your tracheostomy kit ready with an able tracheostomy surgeon. In this case, the plastics sometimes do, or ENT team. So this is one case where you would say, when you plan, I plan to do an awake fiber optic nasal is my plan A. My plan B is, if at all we fail in my hands or my senior's hands, it would be a tracheostomy under consent. So that would also be ready. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is how you would start your plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Anything you would like to add here, Dr. Vidhi?
In this case, nebulization was the only option, but what if we had a TM joint ankylosis? What are the other methods for anesthetizing the airway for an awake fiber optic intubation?
if there is a first before the intubation, we can give the local anesthesia to the at that particular area and then release the contracture before the induction with the Tumsan local anesthesia at that area and release the burn contracture, and so the extension can
No. I'm not
properly.
asking about the other plan of anesthesia. I'm asking if this was not a Burns contracture, what are the methods for anesthetizing the upper airway for awake fiber optic intubation? One is nebulization, the other is gargles. Anything else that we can do for anesthetizing the upper airway?
We can block the block the particular nerve to the superior laryngeal nerve block, and
Which other nerves do we need to block?
recurrent laryngeal nerve
And glossopharyngeal nerve.
laryngeal nerve.
So how do we block all the three?
After that, first due to the palpate the hyoid bone, and at the corner of the hyoid bone, just below the hyoid bone, we can inject the local anesthesia to
It is above the corner, not below the corner.
Okay.
And for the recurrent laryngeal nerve, we use a transtracheal, right? And for the glossopharyngeal, we can either use a pellet at the tonsillar fossa, or we can block it near the styloid foramen, where it emerges from the styloid foramen, right?
Okay.
Yes, so it's very useful to know all these blocks, because not all patients have a patent nostril. Particularly if this lady, for example, had a very bad injury that even blocked her nostrils off. In your pre-op assessment, you put your nasal endoscopy and it just doesn't go, or even a size 5 tube doesn't go, and there is no point having a fiber optic scope. So having this block, what other option, I'm sure you've read in history before the days of fiber optic intubation, for a lady with such burns with microstomia and fixed flexion neck, what is the option that together surgical and anesthetic team have to do to secure an airway for this lady? What is that option, which also you have to be prepared for if you're in an area where such burns are going to come?
There is a if the blind nasal intubation.
She's got fixed flexion. Yes, blind nasal in expert hands,
With
one thing. Fixed flexion, microstomia, nose is blocked. So there is no way of blind nasal. Have you read about where talking about, scar release, labiottomy with tumescent anesthesia and then proceed to intubation? Is that something that you have read about?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
You can give the tumescent anesthesia or particular area, that area. We can in that use the 2% lignocaine, then adrenaline, 1 ml of adrenaline, and then hyaluronic acid as a fibrinolysis of that particular area, and then use the ringer lactate. All this mixed to make this tumescent local anesthesia. We can insert at that particular area and then release the contracture of that area of this patient. So the we can get the proper extension at that time.
Yes. So you make up a
it is.
Yeah, please proceed. Yes, I'm listening.
We can also use the patient to the low dose ketamine for the analgesia.
Yeah, I think ketamine is a lovely drug. So what sort of dose would you give? So ketamine, why is it suitable in this situation where you cannot afford to give a full anesthesia, but ketamine is a beautiful drug? Why is it the choice, and what character of ketamine is suitable for you here, for this patient here?
Due to the because the ketamine has an analgesic effect, and so we can use the 0.5 milligram per kg ketamine give to the patient. But the drawback is the ketamine increase the secretion, and after that patient develop the confusion and after the post-op area. So we use the before glycopyrrolate for the anti-secretory and give the midas to the patient for any post-op.
So you'd give 1 milligram midas or 2 for her size. I think 1 shot of glycopyrrolate. Get your expert surgeon ready, one who can do it quickly, and you prepare your tumescent solution properly with a constant. So you make up a solution, a 200 ml in a bowl, like we do in a surgical bowl. So when you add 2%, 10 ml, and then you would add 1 in 500,000 adrenaline. So, or if you add 1 in 100, then it gets diluted to 1 in 500. Then with Hylase, two ampules, you break them into. So that would give you a tumescent anesthesia. So they inject and they release the scars, so your mouth opens. So now you are creating a pathway for oral fiber optic. Yes. So for oral fiber optic, which airway will help you for oral fiber optic?
Sorry, no?
Which airway guide will help you for oral fiber optic? See, just because you open the airway doesn't mean you can get a laryngoscope in, right? Because you still have fixed neck. So you will still need fiber optic oral intubation. Yes or no? So for that, any airways that are useful for oral intubation?
Supraglottic airway device, intubating LMA.
You can try intubating LMA, you can try supraglottic airways if they will sit, or if you want to guide with the oropharyngeal, so they have these Berman airways for oral intubation, which opens up and then you can guide your tube. So that those are the options that are available. Yes. Okay. So if at all this was a failed airway situation, what option do you have? So what would you do to not allow this to go to a failed airway? What are your precautions so that you don't allow this to be a failed airway? She can live with contracture, right? So what are your precautions best, or your plan B, which is a tracheostomy? So what is in your hands as an anesthetist, a safe anesthetist, that you are going to maintain at all times to make sure this is not going to be a failed airway or any unsafe situation?
Make the all the preparation before to the OT, and first this is the fiber optic intubation. So make the patient proper understanding of the patient, and in the fiber optic intubation there is a patient is awake, so the all the airway reflex are the present in this patient. So there is no any respiratory depression or airway compromise, so the airway reflex, loss of airway reflex is not present due to the awake fiber optic intubation. So we can know the patient is any difficulty in breathing at that time, or particularly before the go for the procedure.
Yes. So you're going to make sure the sedation anesthetist, there are two anesthetists here, one who is doing the intubation, the other is the sedationist. So you're going to be monitoring the patient in a way that the sedation is a conscious sedation at all points of time, and patient, until the point when the tube is in and EtCO2 comes up, is able to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down as a way of communication. Yes. And all the vital signs should be maintained. You'd never one point should we have any problems with the oxygenation, because you're going to maintain the sedation that the patient can herself breathe and keep herself alive. So that is what is our main role. So we do cause no harm to the patient by attempting at intubation. Okay. Anything you'd like to ask at this point, Vidhi?
No.
Okay, so you've successfully got I think we are nearly 1.5 hours in. So let's see what we can do in the grand final few questions. So you've got successfully secured your airway. The surgeons have proceeded, and it's gone on for 2 to 3 hours. You got a good surgeon who's done a beautiful work. What are your targets here? Targets of anesthesia in terms of fluid balance, ideal for extubation at the end of surgery?
during the whole intra procedure, first I have to assess the before the electrolyte and the serum protein and albumin used for the maintenance fluid to the patient as a ringer lactate solution or any dextrose normal solution to this patient. And during all the procedure, I have to measure the urine output of the patient, which is the 0.5 to 1 ml per kg per hour, which is the equal to the input and output. So I can correlate that the kidney is properly functioning and the patient get adequate fluid during the intra.
Okay, so you're going to maintain all the good end organ functions. So making sure your blood pressure is good, heart rate is stable, no tachycardia. Make sure the blood loss, ensuring that if there is a blood loss, you would want to replace. Yes, so when would you ask for blood in this patient? If the blood loss is greater than any particular level?
Yes. After duty, if the intra there is a blood loss, I will ask for already BT, I PET cell volume to the patient if there is failure during the intra.
So if the blood loss greater than 500 to 1000 ml and the patient tachycardic, and if the patient looks a little more paler than what she was before, and the urine is beginning to drop less than 1 ml per kilo, then there might be a need for transfusion. So you will consider it either now or post-op. You can think about it. Yes, because unless the patient is compromised, you wouldn't give intraoperatively. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you're making sure oxygenation is good. And for such a large surface area, what other precautions in operating theater is ideal for this patient so she wakes up well and comfortable?
Last surface, so the chances of the hypothermia during the intra is most important to prevent the patient to become hypothermic. So we can use for the warmer to the flow warmer to the patient and unburned area, lean with the cover with full to the patient, and the operation temperature should be maintained between 28 to 32 degrees Celsius during all the procedure. So our main goal is to prevent the hypothermia to the patient.
So when we say goals, we will include temperature also in that because it can cause problems, correct? So temperature starting from humidified oxygen, room temperature, ambient temperature, humidified oxygen, warmed up fluids, warmed up surface areas, all the unoperated areas covered, as you rightly said. And we want to make sure that the patient is comfortable and not shivering when she wakes up. Other than this, so what would be ideal? So what is your plan for extubation?
After completion of the operation, I first assess the patient on the vitally that the pulse and blood pressure is settled or not. If it is settled, then go for the weaning, looking for the weaning of all the relaxant after that, and then return of the muscle tone power is present or not, and the spontaneous respiration has come or not. After gaining all these things, looking for the tone power and start the reversing of the patient, and looking for the airway is main thing. I look for the airway which is the clear or not before extubation. There is any secretion or anything else present to the airway, there is a chances of bronchospasm after the extubation. So first assess before any secretion or present or not into the airway.
So ensuring your patient is adequately analgesic, you would have given some fentanyl, and considering we would have given plenty of non-depolarizing muscle relaxant because you said that she is probably resistant. So reversal of muscle relaxation is ideal. Would you use TOF? Is that something that you're familiar with, and what count is ideal for reversal in this patient? At the same, would you have continued dexmedetomidine again? So how are you going to wean them off? When do you start weaning them off? As this patient surgeon starts bandaging, when does your process begin?
After completing the OT and completing the proper the skin grafting, and the surgeon start dressing, weaning of the dexmedetomidine, and then
you can in fact leave it on a small dose because it lets them tolerate the tube, right? I'm sure you do that. So you would have given fentanyl, you would check the TOF. So TOF count, if you don't have a TOF, which I think majority of the hospitals don't have a train of 4 count, you would actually go with assessing the respiratory rate, rhythm, volume, and is it rhythmic, and then wait for adequate patient response. And from the surgical side, what are the points that would make you extubate on table? If not, when would you leave this extubation or delayed, or any other option you have? I have given you.
If there is a due to this neck contracture is released and the grafting was put on this patient. So the after extubation, the proper neck position is not maintained. So during the movement of the neck, the graft may be rejected, or there is a chances of not proper functioning of the graft. So as per the surgeon's request, we can shift the patient which intubated in the post-op area and give the some muscle relaxant or anything. Our main aim to not movement of the patient, so the graft was maintained.
Yes, so see, the whole idea, we want to make sure that the surgery is successful, yeah, and the airway is safe. So if at all there is a let go of the graft, or there is a hematoma, or there is an edema, surgical edema because of muscle damage, often it is a superficial surgery, but we never know when the muscle contracture is released, there is a lot of edema around. So we might have a compromised airway in the post-operative period. So you may have edema, bleeding, compromised airway. So both for surgical flap reason as well as for the airway purpose, we may have to leave it in for 4 to 6 hours, then do a cuff leak test, make sure everything is okay, and then take it off next morning. Or if it is purely superficial and you are not anticipating any edema and it was a very simple straightforward, you might do it at the end of the surgery. But most of the times, tracheostomy, is that an option or not? What are we generally aiming for, to do a tracheostomy or not?
Ideally, in this patient, if there is a in the post-op area, if the patient develop difficulty in breathing, so we don't have the airway properly, so tracheostomy should be done in that time.
Tracheostomy should be avoided because it's a neck area, because tracheostomy itself can cause problems, emphysema and all that. So mostly our surgeons, I think as we advance decade by decade, we are avoiding tracheostomy. When I was very junior, I think most cases we did tracheostomy because it was the safest option. But nowadays we are trying to avoid, we are holding on the tube, leaving them in post-op units, so we can actually keep an eye, because we have CO2 monitors, because we have good ultrasounds, we can actually keep an eye on these patients. So depending on the setup that you have, post-op setup, and how much amount of care you can give, I think it's a choice to be made between the anesthetist and the surgeon based on the post-op facility. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so depending on that and the nature of surgery. So there are factors here. Airway, is it edematous? Then because of multiple attempts, whatever, we don't know, right? Whether you had a stricture there or not. So how good was the airway? Is it safe to take a tube out immediately? Any surgical factors that might cause bleeding or flap disintegration, then you leave it in. Any other problems that the patient is sick or there is acidosis and patient is not waking up correct because of muscle relaxation, then you keep it in. So and post-op care unit, you know, depending on how good your unit is, whether you are happily take it out and then your outreach will come. So those sort of factors will decide whether when you actually take the tube out, and you make a wise decision in the interest of the patient safety. Yeah. Anything else, Dr. Vidhi? Anything else you would like to say?
No.
I think that brings us to the end, unless Dr. Harsh wants to tell something.
It's pleasure
So,
present in is a large platform, and I'm particularly thankful to the sir and both the madam that give chance me to the present the case in the task group.
No, before we conclude, a word about retrograde intubation you want to talk about as a completion sake.
correct. Yes, yes, it's there.
In the retrograde intubation, first pass the nasal small wire or epidural like a small wire or catheter from the in the trachea and pass to the oral cavity, and then after coming from the oral cavity, from the nose or oral cavity, after coming from this area, we can insert the load the tube over that area and go for the intubate in this patient.
Yeah, it's actually we pass a needle. Actually, we pass a 18 gauge needle after local infiltration in the trachea, tracheal rings, or in the cricothyroid membrane. Then the best one, some people say we can use epidural catheter, but we have used mostly Terumo wire, what they use in for URS, urethroskopy. The urologists use it
More
generally.
sturdy, right?
Yeah, it is more sturdy and it's very soft. And the problem with epidural catheter, it gets rolled in the pharyngeal area. But here the Terumo wire, it easily comes through either through the nose or the mouth. Okay, once you get the wire out, put an artery clamp over the neck so that your wire doesn't move. Take an adequate length. It is actually 45 centimeter length wire. So you can pull through your nose or mouth, whichever way it comes through easily. Take an adequate length to introduce the tube and keep a artery forceps. Then you can slowly guide through it. Okay, so that is for a completion's sake. So some examiners may be interested to know about retrograde because it's very easy and it's more safer also. Though it is not attempted nowadays very frequently with fiber optic, as Dr. Vanilla and Dr. Vidhi said. But I think still it is a very good procedure for rural anesthetists, at least.
Life-saving procedure, because
Yeah.
as anesthetists, we do Seldinger technique. This is something to be familiar with in the, at least even if not patients, I think we can train them in the simulator settings. I think that's what we've been, no, Sureen?
Yeah, so that's what.
So how did you feel, Dr. Harsh?
Nice presentation. So only thing in exam is since you had a Burns contracture here, it's fine. But every exam, they will have a thyroid or something, even a small thyroid nodule, they will take you to the difficult airway situation. Obese patient, they will push you to difficult airway. Pregnant lady, they will push you to different. So prepare this properly. As the examiners told you, prepare the scoring systems, those things. Some theoretical part of the difficult airway part, you should definitely know. Okay, before you prepare for exam. Okay.
Because airway becomes our life, you know, that first step, and it all starts from assessment. So you did well, and it takes a lot of courage to come up here and present to people across the live telecast, and you did very well. Just make sure you revise your theory and also practice your answers, because it's one thing knowing the answer, it's another thing actually speaking out. So the steps, if you just revise them just once or twice in front of a mirror, you will follow the same sequence when you actually speak to the examiner. It's just an art of presentation and drama in front of the examiner on that day. I'm sure you'll do great when the same patient comes in real life, but it's just an art of presenting without repeating the words and the same thing, you know, like it's all problem in the nose, problem in the oropharynx. It's not like that. So use the correct keywords in the right order, and it's just flying by, and in few months you'll be qualified super anesthetist to begin your career. Good luck. Thank you. Very nice internal examiner.
Thank you, Dr. Vanilla.
Good luck with all your students.
Thank you, Vanilla, for
Thank you, Sureen.
Thank you very much for joining us in this program. And thanks, Dr. Vidhi, for preparing your postgraduate to present this case. And special thanks to Dr. Harsh for coming on screen and putting a test to your knowledge. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for the evening. Bye.
Bye. Bye.